of what's going on with Saudi Arabia around sport, around entertainment, around opening up society. I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at that. The big football transfer news, some of those big ones have been around players choosing to go to the Saudi League. Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante, Kalidou Koulibaly, Ruben Neves. That was a turn-up, wasn't it? Just 26 years of age, the former Wolves captain. Among some of the big names on the move, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo, as I was saying, playing for Al Nassr since December. And it comes after the Saudi Private Finance Initiative Fund, the PIF, took control of those 4 Saudi clubs. Al Ittihad, Al Nassr, Al Hilal and Al Ahly. They're the big 4 that the Saudi PIF have basically taken over. Of course, we know PIF already owns Newcastle United. They've just been involved in a merger with the PGA Tour in the Gulf. And this week, there's been speculation they could also be about to take a big stake in tennis. Now, all of this, there's the sporting aspect, of course, and there's a lot of talk about whether Saudi might get the World Cup in the next 10 years or so. And there's talk about the Olympics, etc., etc. It's more than just what's going on with the sporting world in terms of what their plans are. It's all part of the Saudi government's Vision 2030. That's what they're calling it. Opening the country up, diversifying their economy. So what does it all mean for Saudi? What does it all mean for the world, for the rest of us? What does it mean in football terms for the Premier League? What role does Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 play in all of this? We've got a number of guests we can get into to discuss this. Dr. Talal Al-Maghrabi is president of the Saudi Sports Marketing Association. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. John Durden is a freelance journalist who specialises in Asian football. Hello.
Hello, Chris, how are you?
Hi, good. And Dr. Jesse Moritz, who's a lecturer at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies, who joins us from Canberra in Australia. Hello to you as well, and thanks for joining us. Yeah, I think Jesse's with us. We'll hear from them in just a moment. But John, let's just concentrate on some of the football stuff first of all. How is this working? Right, we know all about PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia. How have they ended up buying the 4 biggest clubs in Saudi?
Well, there's always been a strong connection between the state in Saudi Arabia and the football clubs. It wasn't well reported internationally, but even in 2018, the combined clubs in the top tier of Saudi football were about £300 million in debt. And the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, he came in and he cleared those debts to kind of reset the football scene. So there's always been a close relationship between the state and clubs, which partly means it's easier to drive these big 4 teams as a vanguard to kind of drag the Saudi Football League. And the initial target is by 2030 to have the league as a top 10 in the world in terms of revenue generation, whereas these 4 teams become more commercially active, more famous around the world, attract more sponsorship, investment, fans and broadcasting money, and it kind of starts from there. But I must point out that you did mention seeing your friend an Al Hilal Ronaldo kid, but unless he's moved from Al Nassr across Riyadh to Al Hilal.
Beg your pardon. Yeah, you're quite right. You're quite right.
Already millions of fans are upset, I think, around his arrival. But yeah. And I've seen these everywhere you go. You see now these red, yellow shirts of Al Nassr, and that just shows the power of one player.
Yes, and I suppose the difference is because you could look at what the States did in the 1970s, right? You know, when they were bringing big name older players to give the domestic league a real push. There are obvious comparisons there, aren't they? But in this case, it's getting players now. I mentioned Neves from Wolves, players who have still got so much of their career to offer ultimately.
Yeah, I guess many leagues in China have done it as well. Getting older players, it tends to be easier for kind of, countries that are not seen as traditional hotbeds of football. It starts from there, and I think, as I'm sure we'll talk about, football, and this is just one strand of the wider strategy to change, not only society in Saudi Arabia, change its image around the world, and so it's seen as a modern and progressive and exciting country in many different levels. But football is hugely popular in Saudi Arabia. It's not coming out of nothing. I mean, these big 4 teams have history. The big 8 teams from the Asian point of view winning titles. We've got millions of fans. And, they're quite strong. There is an issue in the league with, the balance between these big, with their best teams and maybe some of the weaker ones. But overall, Saudi Arabia is, a powerhouse in Asian football, and he wants to expand that to become, a global player as well.
Yeah, and Dr. Al-Maghrabi, president of the Saudi Sports Marketing Association, as I say, this is just the beginning in terms of football, I guess, isn't it? Because Saudi Arabia, obviously very keen on wanting the World Cup. It's been talked about wanting that within the next decade. How likely do you think that will be?
Yes, if you want to go back, because people are focusing about the changing taking place in the sports industry in Saudi Arabia in the current time, because we are open to the world coming through the digital media as like a one small village. But if you go back to the 70s, you will find out Saudi Arabia also, they live and breathe with football and sports. In that time, we have the biggest players, Rivellino, Bouquet from Germany, from Tunisia, who participated in the late 70 World Cup, in the 82 World Cup. We have by then also Didi, who one of the top coaches from Brazil. We have Santana coming directly from the World Cup to coach one of the Saudi clubs. So from that time, we have players. When we moved and shifted to the professional league, like 15, 16 years ago, also we still have big players, but still all the clubs being owned by the government. So the intervention or the Saudi public fund having 75% ownership of the top four clubs is still owned by the government, trying to build up all the governors or everything, all the structure needed to have the foreign investors coming even to the Saudi market. So it's still owned by the government, but it is the process for the coming 3 years to go for more of a privatization, having Saudi or international to invest more of the Saudi clubs. But the prerequisite is the same as the English Premier League. We need to bring those big players to have
That's the ambition, isn't it? And just on the World Cup, the question I asked you, World Cup, the Olympics as well being discussed?
The Olympic, I think we will have the Asian Olympic going to be in Neom, the winter one. We have also the Asian football going to be in the 27. But the World Cup, I think what I heard even from the media, that the Saudi withdraw their file because there is more lean from the FIFA to give it to Europe. And also Saudi is more now focusing in hosting the Expo 2030, which is even having more people coming to Saudi Arabia than the football.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. Jesse Moritz, and let's broaden this out. We'll still bring you in as well, of course, John, and Dr. Al-Maghrabi as well. But Jesse Moritz, sport is one thing, isn't it? More broadly, what else is happening in Saudi Arabia? This Vision 2030 you hear mentioned from time to time. What is that? What is the vision that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman sees for Saudi Arabia in the near future?
Yeah, this is a really important development for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is facing, a future of being a post-oil future. This is one element of how they're trying to prepare for that. So Vision 2030 is a complete economic and also social transformation plan for Saudi Arabia. It's not the first type of plan like this for Saudi Arabia or for many of its neighbors, but it's definitely quite an ambitious one, which is why it's getting so much attention. It includes things like trying to empower the private sector, which has traditionally been a challenge in Saudi Arabia. They want to provide more opportunities for young Saudis to travel domestically. They realized that so much of their sort of tourism money was being spent overseas. And if they can create more opportunities for Saudis to travel domestically, they can keep those sort of tourism dollars domestically. And it means that they're less reliant on oil and gas exportation, which is finite and non-renewable.
Yeah, so it's about reducing dependence on oil. And I think Dr. Maghrabi there mentioned NEOM in one of his answers in terms of the Olympics. I mean, when you look at this plan and this thing they're calling the line, this just blows my mind. You look at it and you think, well, this can't be happening. Can you just explain what NEOM and the line are?
So if you have social media, you've probably seen advertisements for the line or for NEOM. There's been a huge marketing campaign for this. The plan, and NEOM is just a small element. It's a very flashy program, so it gets a lot of attention, but actually I think some of the biggest elements of Vision 2030 are not about NEOM, but essentially the plan is to build a new city. It's got a number of kind of key elements. It's intended to be carbon neutral. It's got some very flashy and ambitious plans as part of that city. And it's built in the desert in Saudi Arabia. And the line within that is the plan to build a city, essentially, but rather than having it spread out and planned like a traditional city that's particularly aimed around cars, the line is going to stretch along 100 kilometers or so, and it will be quite narrow and quite tall. It's a very different vision for the future, but I think it's worth noting that the purpose of things like this is not entirely to achieve them, I would say, but it's to get your attention internationally, because Vision 2030 more generally relies on attracting foreign direct investment. It relies on getting your attention and thinking about, okay, Saudi Arabia is the new market that's opening up. So in some ways, these projects, and they do have some challenges, I'm understating that for actually implementing them, they don't necessarily have to succeed in their own right. They just need to grab your attention. And they're doing that pretty well because we're talking about it on the BBC.
But they've still got to have the ambition to do the thing, haven't they? I mean, you're saying they don't have to succeed in their own right. I mean, presumably people have pointed at it and go, what were you all talking about if it's a great failure?
Well, so I mean, yeah, there's changes that they're suggesting are momentous. So to give you an idea of some of this, they want to grow the private sector's contribution to GDP from 40% to 65%. So we're about this whole plan was announced in 2015. We're now in 2023. The latest figure that's available is for 2021. It's still at 40%. So we're a long way behind on delivery of getting the private sector to be the engine of growth. Another plan was to increase foreign direct investment and its contribution to GDP. That was meant to go from 3.8% up to 5.8%. We're now as of the latest figures, kind of down around about 2.3%. So there are some issues with missed targets. And it's the real challenge for this is that this is designing a platform and a program for the future of Saudi youth. And there's a lot of promises being made, and entertainment and sports is a big part of that.
Yeah.
And they're putting a lot into this because a lot is the future of Saudi is riding on this success of this program.
Come back to you guys in just a moment, but let's cross over to Lords. There's been another wicket, Ellie.
And Nathan Lyon is out for 7. Ollie Robinson taking the wicket, just trapping him into pulling it down to long leg where it was taken by Josh Tongue. So he was out for 7. Pat Cummins is still there. You remember that these two put together a rather useful partnership to take Australia over the line and to victory in the last Test match at Edgbaston. So Cummins is still there at the moment. He is on 18 and Australia 408 for 9. And England just need to try and get this final wicket and then they'll have a chance probably to bat before lunch.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed. We'll follow that with interest, of course. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia plans to open up as a society, as we were just hearing from Dr. Jesse Moritz there. We've also got John Durden with us as well, freelance journalist who specialises in Asian football. We're talking about, the investment being made across the board, John, and we're talking about investment in football, obviously, and in the sporting world. But we've got these kind of competing themes at play, don't we? And I'll bring this up with all of our guests. We've got a man at the top who wants to open up and modernise society, but a man who quite clearly still has quite authoritarian instincts as well. What has happened when the players have showed an interest or shown up in Saudi Arabia? Have they been asked about some of the issues that there are still many problems with, in terms of human rights violations, executions, etc., etc.?
Well, inside Saudi Arabia, no. I mean, of course, most of them haven't played yet. I mean, Ronaldo came in January, but the rest of the signings are just the new season will start in August. But of course, in the Saudi media, this is not a topic of discussion. It's all about the football. And with Ronaldo, for example, I mean, his football performances have been, okay. I mean, he joined a team that was first and ended up finishing second. But what you're buying, what you're paying for, is a man with 600 million Instagram followers who keeps them updated often about not just goings on the pitch, but everything else he's doing in Saudi Arabia with his family, who is speaking Arabic, and this is he's the ultimate influencer, and that's why they're paying huge amounts of money for him, not so much for his football, but what he does in terms of social media and profile and getting people interested.
Dr. Talal Al-Maghrabi, as president of the Saudi Sports Marketing Association, does it make your job so much harder when there is still this international perception based, of course, on a lot of cases on reality in terms of concerns around human rights, repression of various groups in Saudi society, opposition, etc., and of course the murder of Jamal Khashoggi has to be talked about as well. The allegation that the Crown Prince himself was directly involved in all of that. A leader with two heads in some ways, wanting to open up society, but still with those authoritarian instincts as well.
To be honest with you, it doesn't, because people are smarter now. They can read and search for information. Also in Saudi Arabia, when we talk, even when we sit and talk, we talk about the human violations, of the human rights violations on the West. And so it depends on how you see and define the human violation and human rights, for example, in Saudi Arabia. But I think Saudi Arabia is more open, and even for what you said for Jamal Khashoggi, all the people who did it, they have been tried, they have been in the prison. I think 4 or 5 executed. So that is like the case is being taken through the right path, and that is almost
well, there many people said that whole process was entirely flawed, didn't they?
Yeah, it depends on how you see it and how you define it. But for example, as a country, we are using the right vehicles. What we learn even in the West, how to use, for example, the right methodology to, for example, reach the world, how you attract attention, how you change and be flexible with your policy and procedure to attract foreign investors.
I suppose it does
the same way as a mechanism.
It does depend.
I would like to just take your attention to the Premier League, how it becomes the top league in the world, even far away from the Spanish league, by attracting players, by having the right policy, the governors, reaching 188 countries for the broadcast. So it has a great
I know you're trying to move me on. I know you're trying to move me on, but can I just take you back to what we were discussing? Because you were saying it kind of depends on how you view these things, and I fully accept that there will be a different view of societal rights, human rights to an extent as well, between liberal democracies and other parts of the world. But if you look at the 12th of March last year, for example, according to Human Rights Watch, Saudi authorities executing 81 men on one day, the largest mass execution in years, despite recent promises to curtail its use of the death penalty. Last year, at the Specialised Criminal Court in Saudi, convicting and sentencing at least 15 individuals, citizens and foreign nationals, to between 15 and 45 years in prison for peaceful expression or association, including peaceful online speech on Twitter. And then, of course, one of our listeners has said, what about the treatment of women? In March this year, the Council of Ministers codifying a new law which enforces male guardianship. Only men can be legal guardians under this law. Women must have a male guardian's permission to marry, are then obliged to obey their husband. I mean, none of those things are particularly symptomatic of a very open society, are they?
I don't think so, because what you are saying, some of them, to be honest with you, I haven't heard about executing all these numbers. But we are very, and also we have the law. Any violations in the UK, in the United States, in Russia, some of them related to smuggling drugs. So any violation anywhere in the world, it's not accepted. So you have to accept the law. Any violations will be a violation of the law. So this is taking place anywhere. Even if you go back to the number of executions like per year, you'll find, I think, the United States is in the top and China. So Saudi Arabia is not even in the top list there. But why is the focus in Saudi Arabia?
And the repression of peaceful protest?
We have, if it's been requested by law, as in the UK, you cannot just go in the street and do any disturb in the street. So you need to get a permission. But the people in Saudi Arabia, I think, more of now engaged on the Vision 2030. As the other guest said, I think it is different from any other vision because the people themselves being engaged and seeing the progress and what they want. So
let me just get a bit of context.
As a Saudi, I am more happy to have an open country, attracting more international visitors to our country.
Let me get some context on that from Dr. Jesse Moritz, lecturer at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies in Canberra there in Australia. Some of what I just outlined there, Dr. Moritz, what are we to make of that in terms of, you're talking about foreign investment being so vital, but when you have an incident which is so unforgettably awful, such as the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, what does that mean in terms of how prepared different countries around the world are willing to offer that kind of support to the Crown Prince?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has an enormous effect. And you can see it, again, by the fact that we're talking about it several years later on this program. So the key thing, I think, for listeners to be aware of is that Saudi Vision 2030 is not promising political liberalization at all. That's not the point of this program. It is promising some social liberalization. So there have been a number of announcements made about things that women can and cannot do in public spaces. For example, relaxing the type of dress that you can wear, removing some of the harsher sort of morality police from the streets, that type of thing. But the other part of it that I've already talked about is economic liberalization. In no way does that mean that Saudi Arabia is getting ready to is democratize or even really sort of human rights is not a part of this Saudi Vision 2030 program. So I guess in some ways we shouldn't be too surprised.
It's going to be very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you to all of our guests. Much appreciated. Dr. Talal Al-Maghrabi, who's president of the Saudi Sports Marketing Association. Thanks to John as well. John Durden, freelance journalist specialising in Asian football, and Dr. Jesse Moritz, lecturer at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies. Something we were talking about an hour or so ago, and we had the phone in with Nikki about this earlier on as well. The court ruling that the UK government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. That's the decision that's been made this morning, has been welcomed by the charity that